Archbishop Fulton Sheen said once that there are three surprises in heaven. And I think also C.S. Lewis made the same statement. The first surprise is that those you think you will find in heaven, you may not find them. The second is that those you have condemned and you have dismissed and thought they will not be in heaven, you'll be surprised to find them. And then the third surprise is that you, in spite of yourself, might make it to heaven if you hold on. St. Augustine, reflecting the same profound wisdom, said that there are some who belong to God but who are not in the church. And there are some who are in the church who do not belong to God. That's a very frightening saying. But the gospel today invites us to a totally different mentality about salvation, what God offers to each and every one of us, and how we human beings think about salvation, think about each other, and also think about ourselves. The question that was posed to Jesus in the gospel is, Lord, will only a few be saved? Obviously, the person asking this question is coming from a culture with a mentality of exclusion. So the question presupposes that the questioner and those who belong to his ethnic or religious or racial group are the few that will be chosen. Now, Jesus does not answer this question directly, but he lays down the condition for being a follower of the Lord and the condition that we need to fulfill in order to belong to the kingdom. He says, enter through the narrow gate. Now, this question, will only a few be saved, is one that I think we find every day in our lives. The world today is characterized by all forms of social hierarchies, all forms of exclusionary practices. And often in our church, these exclusionary practices have actually been translated into doctrines, into cultural ecclesial practices, and it has fed a very wrong mindset about who God is and what God does in us and with us and through us. In many parts of Africa, we hear people say, are you saved? The saved and the unsaved. Some people will make citations from the book of Revelation, chapter 7, verse 4, that they even have the exact number of those who will make it to heaven. And so we have created these classes, these divisions, and these hierarchies of the saved and the unsaved. Those who belong and those who are cast outside the door. Now, the Lord is inviting us to a different way of thinking. And this goes back actually in 2nd Isaiah that we heard, that the reason God has chosen any of us to become or belong to the Christian fold is not for ourselves, is for the rest of the world. Indeed, what you find in the book of 2nd Isaiah is that all the nations come to Mount Zion. And then from Mount Zion, they all disperse to the ends of the earth. This movement of the center to the center, and from the center to the margins, is what you find in salvation history. Is from one to many. God's desire, like St. Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4, is for the salvation of all people. Is the will of God that all men and women will be saved. Is the will of God that the love that is poured out on the cross for all people. The Lord says, when I'm lifted up on the cross, I will draw all to myself. Christianity is a religion for all. Christianity is a religion that invites all to the banquet of the Lord. And any form of exclusionary practices, any form of judgmental practices should be condemned. Christianity is an inclusive religion. Everyone belongs. Everyone is a child of God. Everyone is a firstborn child of God. Therefore, the challenge for us is really the challenge that Jesus places before us today. Make the effort to go through the narrow gate. The same word as St. Paul writing to the Philippians in chapter 2, verse 4 says, in fear and trembling you work out your salvation. We are being told that it is not an easy road. It is not simply a walk in the park. Being a good person, being a good Christian demands effort, demands total commitment, demands taking up your cross every day and following the Lord. Being a good Christian also demands that we do not judge others. Being a good Christian requires an inner disposition, a heart open to God. It requires integrity of life, credibility of life, so that what is inside is also what is reflected outside. So there is no hypocrisy, no contradiction. So any good Christian will be very slow to judge any person. Any good Christian will be determined, working every day to include everyone. It's not only a few. It's rather, Lord, how can everyone be saved? And how can I play a part in doing that? And I think that is what the responsorial psalm today is inviting us. All the nations will come to worship the Lord. The Lord sends us, go out to all the nations. Go out to all people, especially those at the peripheries of life, those who are rejected, those who are abandoned. You know, this past week, we said goodbye to my mentor, my hero, and my friend, Laurenti Magesa. And I like to conclude this reflection with the 3 lessons I learned from Laurenti. And I think those 3 lessons we can bring into this gospel today, and we can embrace it. The first lesson from Laurenti is humility. This giant of theology, this great mind, never for once introduced himself to me or to anybody as professor, doctor, father, the author of this book or that. Simply Laurenti. Very unassuming, and if you look at him, if you look at his face, it belies the depth and profundity of his thought. Second point is gratitude. This giant was always grateful. You send him a manuscript and he reads and helps you to even understand so many things you're writing about. And then you send a note of thanks to him. He says, Stan, I should be thanking you for teaching me, for helping me to understand an aspect of theology that I have not been able to read a lot of materials in. He was always thankful. Finally, he was very inclusive. It's interesting that at the tribute we gave, the memorial, we had more non-Catholics than Catholics in that assembly. He always welcomed everyone, and he always was convinced that religion and people's social, economic, cultural context are channels through which they encounter God. For as he argues, there is nothing that is not sacred. So if everything is sacred, like Laurenti Magesa has taught us, it means that our duty as Christians is to always be conscious of the divine presence in all reality. In that sense, it's not only a few who will be saved, it's all. Everyone will be saved because the whole earth is suffused with the splendor of God. It's our duty to ask for the grace to see clearly in every person the face of God. For when we realize how connected we all are, then it is no longer about a few, but it is all of us, united as one family.